The next part of the First Amendment that we're going to focus on is the part of the First Amendment that protects your freedom of speech and freedom of press. They're very similarly associated with one another. Obviously, these are basic freedoms that every American citizen possesses. It's also important to note that the type of speech that is protected is more than just what I'm doing now, which is spoken speech. So this type of speech, spoken speech, is known as pure speech. So clearly that's protected. There are limits on it, but your ability to speak your mind and talk about issues is pure speech. That's protected. But symbolic speech is also protected. You're not saying anything with your words, but maybe it's with actions or something you're wearing, or burning a flag as a symbolic gesture, which is controversial, but is protected under the law. It's also symbolic gestures of speech that are meant to represent something that are protected. So we're going to spend actually more time on focusing what is not protected. So there are lots of rights that you enjoy as an American citizen. None of them are absolute. They come with certain restrictions on them. And speech is no different than that. So for example, libel is not protected. Libel is any kind of printed word, whether it's in a magazine or on a website or wherever else. People that print it know it's false, and they print it anyway, and they're intending to damage a person's reputation, right? If you can prove that that has happened against you in a court of law, this is not permissible, right? You could sue a newspaper or a magazine or a tabloid for libel, for damages, and then be compensated. It's difficult to prove in court, but they couldn't hide behind the First Amendment when they say that, oh, the First Amendment allows me to print this stuff about you. Slander is the same thing, except it's spoken, not printed words. Same thing. You're saying something, maybe on a news broadcast or a show, that you know is false about someone, and it damages a person's reputation. This is also not protected free speech. Any kind of seditious speech, seditious meaning you're urging a violent overthrow of the government, is not permitted. In fact, almost any type of speech that promotes violence is not protected under the First Amendment. Any kind of speech that creates a danger, a clear and immediate danger, would not be protected by the First Amendment. So again, the cliche example that this sort of meme is referencing is sort of yelling fire in a movie theater. If you're in a theater and you're watching a movie and you're bored by it and you decide you're going to yell fire at the top of your lungs and laugh as people run out of the theater, and somebody gets hurt in that stampede, you can't hide behind the First Amendment because your speech created that dangerous situation. Obscene materials are technically not permitted under the First Amendment by the Supreme Court's decisions. The problem is what is obscene or inappropriate to one person might not be to another. The Supreme Court referenced in 1964, one of the justices said, hey, I just know it when I see it. Well, that doesn't really help in legal battles, right? So it's difficult to sort of define, but technically under the law, obscene materials are not permissible or prevented or protected by the First Amendment. Any kind of inappropriate content on regular TV and radio, because government airwaves essentially are being used to beam that content out to citizens. There is greater regulation of it. So we're talking about a sitcom you would see on ABC, right, at 8 o'clock on a Monday night, right, or a regular radio station in your car. You're not going to be able to see certain things or hear certain words because it's regular TV or radio, right? And the Federal Communications Act prevents that kind of stuff, right? However, if you have cable, that's different because you're subscribing to that, right? HBO, you can say things, you can see things that you wouldn't be able to see on Channel 6, ABC. Same thing with the radio. If you have satellite radio Sirius XM, you're going to hear unedited versions of songs. You're going to be able to hear profanity because it's subscribing. You have to subscribe to it. Not everybody has access to it, and it's more private than it is public. And then another interesting one is that about a decade ago, the government passed the Children's Internet Protection Act. This prohibits any kind of pornography from being accessed on library computers, public library computers, which are considered to be an extension of the government. So again, this type of content can be restricted in these government facilities. Despite the fact that there are limitations on individuals' right to practice freedom of speech, there are considerably more restrictions on the government's ability to stop speech, right? The courts will almost never give the government the ability to engage in what we call prior restraint. stopping somebody from saying something or writing something ahead of time. There are always legal remedies to deal with people after the fact, right? To sue somebody for libel or slander, or to accuse somebody of creating a dangerous situation with their speech, or accusing them of this or that. But there's rarely a circumstance in which a court will prevent the speech from happening ahead of time. The government would have to show really good reason that the safety of the country was in danger for the courts to be able to go along with that. So again, this video highlights what kind of speech is protected, but obviously also focuses more on like what type of speech or actions are not permissible.